Hey, welcome to another day with Bob and Chris. Anyway, today, Chris and I were just talking and figured we'd share a little bit about zero trust, not zero trust, 0 day attacks.
We can
And
talk about zero trust too if we want to. Part of this, but yeah,
zero trust is things that we've talked about in the past, Chris. But right
yeah.
now, let's talk about 0 day. Like, what is it? Why? What's going on?
What is a 0 day? Right? It's a vulnerability that nobody really knew about. And it's not patched by the vendor. So what do we mean by that? It could be Microsoft, it could be Apple, it could be Google, it could be Adobe, it could be literally any piece of software or hardware that you have. And if it's exploited, a hacker, threat actor, whatever you want to call them, could deploy malware in your machine, could steal information, could ransom you, things like that. So it's important to look at what's happening in the world and understand that 0 days happen. They're they're kind of rare, but they've increasingly been less rare the last few years. Apple's had like 4 or 5 of them in the last year, just on like iPhones and iPads. Android has them all the time too, as well. So what do we do, right?
So hold on.
Um,
So let's talk about that for a second. So these are all attacks or vulnerabilities that are sitting out there in the software today
yep,
that the bad guys, the script, the bad guys are sitting out there trying to figure out different things. And when they find this vulnerability, they're exploiting it, sending it out, and using it. Some people might have seen an iOS or iPhone patch in the past month that said important security update, and they're getting it today. That's Apple being
yep,
proactive around this.
yeah.
And
So once a 0 day is discovered, which could take a while, right? Sometimes they're not discovered for years. It depends on how it's being executed on. A good example is iPhone's a good example. There's a group out of Israel called NSO Group. They made a software called Pegasus, and
sounds nice.
yeah, it does. They were selling it to governments to basically be able to spy on people's iPhones. So it was a 0 day, but it was something worse. It was actually a 0 click, and that's a 0 day where it doesn't require the user to do anything. So in a 0 day instance, normally you have to do something. You have to go to a website, you have to click on something, download something, and it can execute against a 0 day. A 0 click means you just receive something. So it
Oh
could be a
wow.
text message, which in the Pegasus situation, it was just a text message. Somebody would send you a text message, and it would basically execute on the 0 day, the 0 click, and infiltrate your phone, get root privileges, and be able to read your text messages, read your phone calls, do whatever it wanted because it had root privileges on your device. Those are the holy grail for hackers.
Absolutely.
Because if all they have to do is send you something, that's perfect. Outlook had this issue a couple of months ago that's been patched now, but it was a 0 click for Outlook. If you received a certain email, it would actually try to harvest credentials for like file share access and things in the background, because it would trigger basically Outlook to try to submit credentials to a file share. It wasn't that dangerous, but it was still 0 click, and it could affect certain organizations. Those are the holy grails, because if it doesn't require a user to do anything, there's no social engineering. I don't have to trick you into downloading anything. Like
Just need a
literally,
phone
I just send it to you. Yeah, I send it to you, and like boom, done. So in the event of a phone, it's real easy. It's like, okay, I get somebody's phone number, which is pretty easy to find somebody's cell phone. Let's be real. And if I know I want to get on your phone and I want to hack you and I want to read stuff that you're doing, and have a 0 click vulnerability, I can just text you. Boom, I text you, it goes down. There's an active one right now that Kaspersky noticed on their network. It doesn't look like it affects iOS 16 that came out for Apple devices last September. It stops at 15. But what they noticed is there was some weird traffic on their network, and it was all coming from Apple devices. And it was going to a list of there's a huge list of domains it was going to.
hmm
And they started looking at it, and they were able to they actually released a mitigation tool now, or a tool to discover it now. But you could see where these phones were calling out to a C2 server, which is a command and control server, which is giving people root access to the phones. The cool thing was if you rebooted it, it went away because it wasn't persistent through reboot. However, they kept getting reinfected. So
Text
I
message
guess
away.
if the text message exists, it just automatically executes. If you accidentally click on it again or whatever, it automatically executes again. Or just having it on your device executes again on reboot. So
So you mentioned you just mentioned something. You just mentioned something, kind of glossed over it really quick. Is they the network was being watched for was
Yep.
being monitored and what for where things are going, and they saw it as unusual traffic. A lot of
Yep.
the people we work with might have antivirus software out there. They might have a firewall on their network and think
Yep.
they're all protected. Is this really going to help them today?
Yeah. So when you look at the stuff, you have to look at the whole of what's going on something, right? So you have to look at like, how is a normal day look? And if you don't have the right tools in place and the right team and right things, if you're not looking at the right telemetry inside of your network or on your devices, which is hard for phones, they caught it because it was on their corporate network.
Mm-hmm.
Like out in the wild, if you're never on a corporate network, it's going to be nearly impossible to know. But on a network, let's say it's a bunch of PCs that get infected by a 0 day, or there's a 0 day that exists. Well, when you look at the telemetry of the network, so if you're looking at the network traffic, if you're looking at what's happening on every computer, if you're looking at all that and you're feeding that back into a kind of like a SIM, like managed detection response situation, a team is going to be able to notice when things are going differently, when they're not the same as they were yesterday. One of the things that, like one of the tools that we use, they noticed something about 3CX, which is another 0 day that happened a few months ago with a soft phone. So it's a phone that you just install on your computer and you can make phone calls like you would on a normal phone. Well, they had a supply chain attack and they were infiltrated, and there was they had pushed that out to basically all of these soft phones. And it's not really a 0 day because it's supply chain, but a good example is our team noticed that these things were going, that they were communicating out like abnormally. Like things were happening on the network that shouldn't have been happening, and they were able to block it. Even though nobody knew that the vulnerability existed or that it had been hacked at that point, they stopped the traffic because they saw it where it was going and stuff like that. So what our big thing here is, you need the visibility. The visibility on what's happening is so important. And
Sure.
you want to make sure you keep devices up to date. So 0 day vulnerabilities are something that's going to happen. They can be exploited. So you want to make sure you keep devices up to date. You want to make sure you have a good solution in place to look at the visibility in your network. Make sure you can monitor everything, whether it's network traffic, whether it's what's happening on the device, what users are doing, what they should be doing, what a normal day looks like. And then when there's abnormalities in there, you can react accordingly. And obviously backup is a key, because a lot of these 0 days are being used to basically deploy ransomware. So obviously in that case, you want to make sure you have really good backups and offsite and protected.
So I think we've probably scared people a little bit on this one, and just sitting here thinking about it, we actually have some tools that that can test the effectiveness of their existing firewall and environments. So guys, anyone watching this, if you reach out to one of us, let's sit down and talk, because we do have some stuff that we can share with you on a one-on-one basis to really test and see if your the protection your IT team has in place is actually working. Because a lot of times people are deploying firewalls and stuff that aren't necessarily configured correctly. And even if you think the team's got everything covered, we can sit down. Like, I can give you a couple links to click on, and we'll know right away whether or not you've got everything covered. And if not, that's great. But the real benefit of the stuff that Chris and I have is you don't need to get the IT guys involved. The bad guys don't knock on your door and say, we're here today. Let's run a test. I'm going to give you something, or Chris will give you something to really click on and really do a quick assessment to see what's happening. And I would say drop that. Let's not drop that in the chat. Reach out to us through a direct message, because we don't need everybody to know what's going on. So Chris and I, contact information is in our social media profiles. Reach out, and that's all I think we really need to hit on for today, Chris.
Well, to that point, I just want to finish with this is the protection piece of a network is so important, but what happens when they get past the protection? And that's where 0 day comes in. They get past the protection. You really need to focus on the detection aspect and then the response aspect. And it's so important to do that. So to Bob's point, what we can do is we can at least test the protection part to see if it's actually doing proper detection. But there's a lot more to it. That's a simple test. There's some more advanced things that we can do, like risk assessment and things like that, to really kind of dig into it. But yeah, you just want to make sure that you're keeping devices. Let's recap a little bit. Keep your devices up to date. Threat advisories are so important. That's why we subscribe to different threat advisories. So when other companies see this stuff happening, we know it's happening, and we can kind of get our team involved and make sure that we're protecting the networks and make sure that we're able to detect the things that we do.
And guys,
Because
we need to make sure we're protecting devices that aren't in the corporate network. So they got to be protected anywhere. And that's what we're going to talk about. And
yeah. So if you have any questions on 0 days, 0 clicks, or anything like that, if you want some more examples and things like that, we can definitely have a conversation about it. We can elaborate more if you want something specific. Just drop it in the chat. Let us know. Comment, DM. Good, I think.
Cool. That's it. That's enough for that's enough for this week. We survived the holiday weekend without any major incidences for the most part. So
well, we did. Some people didn't.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Anyway, have a good week, guys, and we will catch up with you next week.
Yep. Have a good week.